We are basically the largest organization in Canada, represents the small and medium-sized business community in Canada. You may be aware that Canada actually has proportionately a larger small business community in our economy than many other economies, larger than the US, for example. And through the last recession, it was quite intriguing that the small and medium-sized business sector kept their employment levels stable. Now, some businesses did lose, notably manufacturers, of course, but some offset that. So we actually, part of the reason we had a reasonably better performance than a lot of other economies through the recession was the resilience and stability of the small business community in Canada. They're in every sector of the economy, every nook and cranny of the country, and they're the ones that if their business goes down, they're probably going to lose their house. So they also have a very serious concern over retirement income. They're certainly not the beneficiaries of any kind of pension plan. What they usually hope for is to sell their business. I'd like to just briefly outline some of the issues from the standpoint of the independent business owner in Canada. Some of the issues they see, what the problem is. I mean, why are we here today? Pensions are important. They've always been important. They'll always be important. Why are we addressing this issue now? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons for it. And some of them are good. Like, we have longer life expectancy now. And when retirement ages for like CPP on 65 were put together decades and decades ago, people maybe lived till 70, 75. And so you can see the math has changed dramatically with the fact that people are living longer. Of course, that's a good thing, but it reflects on the cost of our pensions. We have, of course, dramatically increasing healthcare costs right across the nation, and we obviously consume a lot more of that as we get older. That factors into putting the pinch on pensions as well. We also have a growing gap between pensions in the private sector and the public sector, which is something that has to be considered. And I talk to a lot of actuaries. In fact, I think I've become a sort of an involuntary actuary studying this issue. But the real target groups here, I think most people, and we do have some actuaries on the panel this afternoon, which I think is great because they're probably the most neutral players, if I could say that, in this whole debate. But I think there's general agreement among the pointy heads, sorry Malcolm, that study these issues, where the very lowest of the low-income people are probably going to be okay with CPP, because of course CPP will represent an income replacement that will be acceptable for that group. The rich will take care of themselves. We don't worry about them. But with the private sector middle-class person is probably the one that is going to be the biggest, it's going to be the biggest challenge for them to replace whatever proportion of their income. Is it 60%? Is it 50%? We can all debate that number. But whatever that number is, that's going to be the target group. And so that's where I think we need to probably pay most of the attention. There's been an awful lot of myths that have been circulated about the pension problem. And one I've heard frequently is, well, if private sector companies could only bring what they pay up to the public sector level, everything would be fine. Well, unfortunately, that's a nice concept. Unfortunately, it's unrealistic. Private sector companies, and notably small business, who typically operate on very thin margins, and some exceptions, but the vast majority operate on very thin margins, if they brought their payment, whether it's salary, pension benefits, whatever, up to that, they wouldn't be in business anymore. And so that's the problem. And indeed, we saw it with large companies too. General Motors, for example, had to scale back because they were competing in a marketplace. Governments, of course, can compel people by law to pay taxes. I don't know any business that can force consumers to buy their goods and services, and we don't want that, of course, but there's a very different reality, and so that's a myth that needs to be debunked. Speaking on behalf of the small business sector, small businesses are extremely sensitive to payroll taxes. They are basically a tax on jobs, and CPP is a payroll tax. So that would be, again, all of these things sort of sound good in theory, but what would that cost us as an economy in terms of employment creation and so on? So I think that question has to be raised as well. Increasing RRSP limits, well, that's been mooted around. You know who that would benefit? That would benefit well-off people. Right now, we know people don't even use their RRSP room that they have now. So obviously, increasing that would be really more of an academic exercise for the people that we really want to try to direct assistance toward.